Assalamu alaikum, ladies. Alhamdulillah, I finally did it. I actually wrote a book. It's dedicated to all the single Muslim mothers out there, hence the name, How to Be a Single Muslim Mum. Inshallah, it's available as an ebook, paperback, and it will be available as an audio. Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu feekum, sisters, for the support. Check out the link in the description to get yours. The Niqabi Diaries, Season 4.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Season 4 of the Niqabi Diaries. Alhamdulillah, we have with us sister here to share her niqab story with us, inshallah. Sister, could you please introduce yourself for the listeners and tell us a little bit about what you do, inshallah?
Yes, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Fatima, aka Yoms. I'm the mother of Yomi, alhamdulillah. I am a content creator and community builder that lives in Kansas City, Missouri, in the United States, alhamdulillah. I am one of the founders of Muslim Girls Doing Things, which is a organization and nonprofit where, alhamdulillah, we create safe spaces for Muslim girls to be able to do things communally in the United States, specifically in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been wearing, alhamdulillah, niqab now since October of last year. So it's been a little bit over half of a year, alhamdulillah. So yeah, the content that I create primarily focuses on Muslim women's issues, whether it's navigating, the hijab journey or navigating relationships with other people or how to feel empowered in hijab in general or modest fashion. So alhamdulillah. That's a little bit about me.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Allahumma barak, mashallah. So I've seen some of your content. That's how I saw your YouTube channel, mashallah, and I really liked it, alhamdulillah. And I noticed that you're tackling a lot of the issues which are facing a lot of the young Muslims today. So I'm also glad to hear that you've got the Muslim Girls Doing Things program that you've set up as well. So inshallah, you can tell us a little bit more about that later on. But first, could you give us a little bit of information about your Islamic background and how you came to be wearing the niqab and so on?
Yeah, definitely. So I, alhamdulillah, was raised Muslim. But I want to say we didn't start practicing Islam until maybe, like as a family, until I think I was like 7 years old. My mom had broken both of her legs, and I think that changed a lot of things for her. And as a result, when things change for a mother, I think a lot of things also change for her kids as well. So I just remember after that, alhamdulillah, like going to, we call it, in Somali, we call it duksi, which is basically when you go to the weekend school so you can learn about Islam and stuff outside of like the public school and so on. But as far as my niqab journey, or actually let me back up and talk about like when I started practicing. I think even though my mom started practicing and my family started practicing as a whole, I started practicing myself Islam when I was a sophomore in high school. So I think I might have been around 14 or 15 years old. And I don't know, subhanAllah, like when you first start getting interested in Islam yourself and wanting to have a relationship with Allah, I don't know, there's nothing that compares to it at all. Especially when you first begin your journey, because it's something so new and so pure. Alhamdulillah. But since then, I think it's been over a decade. But as far as my niqab journey, I started wearing it last year, in October. And so I remember during the time, I was getting into, making content a little bit consistently. And I remember everything was happening with, the news that was coming out of Palestine. And so I had a lot to think about, about like my impact here in the dunya, how I want to have my relationship with Allah carry forward, and what kind of like impact I want to have on my daughter as well. She was just turning, I think, 2.5 at that point. And so I remember just doing things that I felt like were very inconsistent to who I believed I was as a Muslim. Just small things that you might like overlook. Like when I would leave the house, I would put on a little bit of makeup, some concealer. I would put on, even especially when I recorded content, even if I was in my own home and I was recording content that may have had a good message, I remember doing these little things, and I remember thinking at that time, it just felt inauthentic. I felt like I wasn't myself, and I felt like I was doing something not for the sake of Allah, but for the sake of people and for the sake of appearing in a certain light. And it was a really painful realization to come to, because you never want to feel like you're doing something for other people, because you know how that can get. Like, you can get trapped in a situation where it becomes like you're like a hamster on a wheel, and there's no way for you to get off. And so I was like, you know what, ya Allah, like I need to stop doing these little shifts to please other people, and I need to be more focused on you. And it went beyond just makeup too. It went beyond that, even in other like aspects of my life, the way that I was carrying myself, the way I was speaking and all that. And so I was like, I'm in need of a complete lifestyle shift. Again, I wanted to be more aware of my intentions, especially as a Muslim and as someone who wants to be in a good relationship with Allah. I was ready to take that next step that I felt was going to help me like adjust my intentions. And so I made dua, and I remember at that time I had two friends, alhamdulillah, who wore niqab, actually. And I also had one friend who had taken it off during that, like a little while before that. And so I remember having conversations with them and asking them, hey, like, at first niqab did not seem like the obvious, step to take. I was just having conversations, and sometimes you make dua to Allah to guide you to something, and then He does guide you to something without you even
Yes,
realizing it. It might be the thing for you. Yeah, alhamdulillah, that's what happened. So I go to them and I'm like, hey, why did you guys start wearing niqab? I'm interested in that. I want to know why you did it. Um, and they just started telling me like why they did it. And then their answers just sat with me, and I'm going through my day, and then something happens to me. It's like I have this sudden burst of energy. I go online, right? And I find the first niqab that I can see, and I order it. And I'm like, I'm about to start wearing niqab. And I committed to it. Like, and I was like, okay,
mashallah.
this is gonna happen, inshallah. And yes, subhanAllah. So that's pretty much how it happened. I didn't know anything about the kind of niqab I should have ordered. The first one that I ordered, honestly, like, it might not have been the best one for me, given at the time. Like, it was a full niqab that had, like, the fabric was so incredibly heavy, and I could barely breathe. And so I remember that was a test in itself, alhamdulillah. And I learned a lot from that experience as well, right? Like, knowing, learning about the fabric and stuff that I should get for myself, alhamdulillah, to make niqab a little bit easier. But yeah, so that's pretty much how my niqab journey started off.
Alhamdulillah, subhanAllah, that's beautiful. And it just reminds me as well, similarities with my story too, because I had the same issue with my first niqab as well. And I think somebody had given it to me, but the fabric was so heavy and I could barely breathe in it. And the same day I was doing a presentation in front of some non-Muslims. And like I started to get really flustered because they started asking, the uncomfortable questions like that non-Muslims love to ask about Islam. And at the time I was still only like a few years, being Muslim. So I started getting quite flustered, and not being able to breathe properly in the niqab was literally like, subhanAllah, alhamdulillah, it didn't put me off wearing it, but it was really difficult that day. It was really difficult, alhamdulillah. But yeah, it's good because I think that just points to some of the things that we need to be aware of, as Muslims, that the different types of fabric and things like that is important. Because for some people, maybe somebody would try out and think that all the niqabs is going to be the same, but it's not. Obviously, there's different materials and stuff like that you can try, and full niqab and different layered niqabs and all that kind of thing. Like, it's just like a whole world of niqab now, isn't it? Fun. Like when you start wearing it, then you realize, So for you, okay, you started your journey, and alhamdulillah, did you feel satisfied then that, after those other adjustments you've already made in your life, and in trying to improve your hayat, basically you was already doing that, from the inside. It wasn't, I think that's very clear from your story, it was definitely from the inside out. Did you feel that once you had put the niqab on, you kind of, you got to that place where you felt like you've completed something that, that you was trying to achieve?
SubhanAllah, I feel like when I did that, I started the journey. I really truly do. Because yeah, alhamdulillah, I feel like I definitely really started the journey. Because from then on, it was so much easier for me to, alhamdulillah, like be aware of my intentions, whether I'm at home, whether I'm outside of the house. And I think that's a really big thing as Muslims, to constantly be refreshing and rechecking our intentions. And you know how things are in today's day and age, like there's all these, things that can grab our attention. And so taking the time to really reflect on our intentions about things might be put on the back burner. At least it was for me. And so I think that was the beginning of my journey of refreshing my intentions and making it a constant habit, for sure. Um, and alhamdulillah, like working on that, especially as it relates to my modesty, helped bleed into other aspects of my life, whether it was like in other forms of worship to Allah or in the relationships that I have with the people around me and so on. But alhamdulillah, I think, and the reason why I say it was the beginning of the journey instead of, me feeling like I reached a place is because, I don't know, I consider myself like a constant work in progress. Um, Alhamdulillah, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's imposter syndrome. I don't know if it's, I don't know, maybe Allah has given me a small piece, a fraction of humility, whatever it is. I'm grateful for it because I think, um, when you feel like when you feel like you've reached like an end goal, at least and as it relates to Islam, at least for me, um, it becomes harder for me to move to the next level because I never want to feel like it's enough. You get what I'm saying? I hope that answers your question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Wallahi, alhamdulillah. I'm glad you said that because that's Islam,
Mm-hmm.
That's our religion. Like, where there's no, like, the end goal is Jannah, basically. So we're never going to reach that in
Exactly.
this life. So, that's what it's about at the end of the day. And I think, you gave a beautiful answer, Alama Barik, because it is literally the beginning of something. And I think, that's why, that's why I asked you, because often when you find that, sometimes you get sisters, for example, maybe they're not wearing hijab at all, and they'll say things like, oh, I want to become more practicing, or I want to, like, learn this, or I want to, like, do this specific things. Like, they kind of, maybe they're trying to give themselves certain milestones, or they feel they need to reach a certain level of piety before starting to wear the niqab, or the hijab itself. But the reality is, it's a lifelong journey. There's no kind of, it's something that you never, like, you don't put the niqab on because, oh, I feel like I'm pious now. That's not what it's about. And I think that's where some Muslims, unfortunately, because I do always ask sisters in the podcast, like, if they feel that there's a difference between how sisters with hijab get treated compared to sisters wearing the niqab. And the reason why I ask that question is because oftentimes, like, from my personal experience, before wearing the niqab, actually, I found that there was always a lot of talk with sisters in the masjid. Sometimes you find sisters get together, and if a sister comes in and she's wearing the niqab, other sisters would be like, oh, like, the sisters who wear the niqab, they don't give salams, or they think they're too, they think they're too pious more than other sisters, something like that. And then sometimes as well, some people have this perception of sisters who wear the niqab that, oh, they're so religious because they've got the niqab on, and they're so knowledgeable, or they must be, like, really, like, super Islamic and super righteous, and this kind of perceptions. But the reality is, it's just another part of hijab, and another extension of the haya, and that sister's still striving just like everybody else. So where some of us fall short, others might be better. For example, the sister who's wearing the niqab, maybe she struggles even waking up for Fajr. We don't know. But and the sister who doesn't wear hijab at all, maybe she never misses Fajr. So there's, everybody has their own personal journey with the religion. So we shouldn't, see certain, maybe you can call them achievements, as like, oh, end goals, or like, yeah, like, I've done this now and khalas. It's always a new beginning to carry on and strive to do better for the sake of Allah. Alhamdulillah.
Exactly.
So alhamdulillah. So since we're in the niqab now, it's not been too long, but how has your experience been with regards to those around you, your family, friends, or like in your environment in general? Has it been a positive experience, would you say?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I always joke, that Allah never brings me an Islamophobe or anything, because I would bite back. So alhamdulillah, I have not been put in that position, especially with anyone who is not, friendly to Muslims. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. May Allah keep it that way. As far as, my family members and my friends and coworkers and so on, my colleagues, yeah, I've honestly I've gained so much support from all of them, alhamdulillah. Um, this entire experience has been, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the things that caused me to want to wear niqab were the internal things that I was battling with. And so I'm very grateful Allah didn't put me in a position to experience a lot of um, tests from external sources, such as the people in my life. Alhamdulillah. I will say the only thing that happens is, sometimes my family members have concerns because we do live in a state that's on the Bible Belt. And so sometimes people tend to be a little bit more conservative and um, not as welcoming to Muslims. And when you're in Niqabi, you're um, people might feel they might feel even less connected to you as they would with just someone who is a regular hijabi. Not to put too much distance between the two, but there's like physical like differences, right, with the way that we present our hijab. And so alhamdulillah, that has been the only extent, and it's only been so much so as they've just shown concern to make sure that I am protected, and like have my pepper spray, and make sure that if I'm traveling, I'm going with a group of people and so on. So I'm never in a situation by myself. But alhamdulillah, for the most part, I've experienced unparalleled support. I know that's not always the case for other sisters, so.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, that's fantastic. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, and like do you work at all? You mentioned your projects as well, and can you go into your YouTube and what made you want to start doing the content creation?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So I'm doing a little bit of a few different things right now. I have my 9 to 5. I work in tech, and I build web apps. Alhamdulillah, with that situation, interestingly enough, I never have my camera on at work unless it's like, the boss is coming and having a meeting with us. Uh, it's very ironic because I am a content creator and the camera is usually on, right? But as far as Muslim girls doing things and content creation, I do have a YouTube, alhamdulillah. I've been consistent on there full time since I want to say January of this year, alhamdulillah. So it's been about 6 months now. And I touch on a lot of the different topics that I mentioned to you earlier, the Muslim women issues, and hopefully soon, inshallah, I'll get into vlogging, day in the life as a Niqabi and so on, so the girls can see like what it's like, especially living in a Western country, because I think that's something that those who might consider, Niqab would be interested in. And so apart from that, I also do work with Muslim Girls Doing Things, which is the nonprofit that my friends and I started in our city. And so with that, honestly, it really started off by us going to a halaqah last year, and we just had so much fun at the halaqah. And I think my friend actually put it together, and it was a speed dating style program where she gave like a little lecture about a topic, and then it was girls only. And then whenever we got to the activity portion of it, she kind of asked us questions, and we would get into pairs of twos and then answer the questions over the course of like 2 minutes or something, and then we would switch off with the next person and so on. And I remember we just had so much fun, like, because the questions ranged, in deepness, introspection, to, being silly questions like, what was your worst hijab phase? And so it was such an amazing experience that I was like, we need to bottle this up and we need to reproduce this for other women, because alhamdulillah, like, we have each other, but not everyone else might have a community the way that we have a community. And so my friends and I were like, okay, let's host a retreat. So we hosted a sisters retreat. When I tell you I think we were moving off of tawakkul and vibes, because we planned the retreat over the course of like a month and a half. And I think the point of the theme of the retreat was tawakkul. So we had to figure out what was the programming going to be, where were we going to do it at, how are we going to get funds for it. So alhamdulillah, in the course of a month and a half, we pulled it together. And then It was a beautiful time. It was multi-generational. The youngest person was my daughter, who at the time was 2. The oldest person was one of the mothers who was in her 60s. And it was such an amazing time that, alhamdulillah, like after that, we decided, you know what? We're going to make this a nonprofit so that we can have more spaces where we can be together. Because, we don't get chances like that, especially when you live in the West and there's all the, individualism being pushed on folks, and people are not together. People are not doing things together unless they're getting paid to do it. And so we decided, alhamdulillah, right? And so we were like, okay, let's make this a thing. So then we decided to make it a thing. And since then, alhamdulillah, we've been doing, hosting different events in our city, just trying to figure out the needs of our city, and meeting them. So like, for example, hosting a modesty pantry where we get people who, everyone has clothes in their closet that they probably haven't worn. That Eid dress they only wore one time, or the outfit that they bought, that they thought would fit them and it doesn't, or the hijab that has a stain on it that they just can't get out. So, alhamdulillah, we get them to donate them, and then we have a pop-up pantry where the girls can come. They can pay whatever they want for the items, whether it's $0, whether it's $5, doesn't matter to us. And then we're hosting another retreat, inshallah, in August 1st of this year. What else? We host like different halaqas in the city as well. Different, like one was associated, we called it a Sisterhood in Bloom. It was during the springtime. We had the girls come together and make bouquets. They brought their own flowers. We provided some too. And they kind of exchanged the flowers that they had with one another and made beautiful bouquets that were unique. And then we had a speaker come and give a halaqa about beauty in Islam. And so just different, we try to build a sense of sisterhood across our city, because, sometimes there can be a divide too, with people going to different masjids, the things that, might not bring us together. We decided, okay, let's be very intentional about this and bridge the gap between all the Muslim women in our city, 18 and up, regardless of what masjid they go to, their nationality, whatever. Alhamdulillah. And I'm very grateful, alhamdulillah, we've been given this opportunity, because at the end of the day, if Allah doesn't make a means for us to be able to do things like this, we wouldn't be able to. So, alhamdulillah.
Exactly, subhanAllah, that sounds really amazing and beautiful. So I'm completely ignorant to America, because I'm from the UK, and UK is very small. I know America is just very big. So is your city quite a large city, and would you say there are a lot of Muslims in the community in general?
I wish I had the exact numbers, because people ask me this all the time. But I will say, when it's Eid, on Eid day, we always have multiple prayers across the whole city. And even like at the biggest one, I want to say we have like maybe 100,000 people who go to it.
Oh, wow,
this is my guess. Yeah, this is my guess. Because even Kansas City, Missouri is pretty big compared to other cities in our state. Yeah.
Okay, mashallah. So how do you go about like getting in contact with sisters, or like, kind of putting out the words that, about your events and retreats and things like that?
Oh, my sister, girl, we try to be very strategic. And so we try to be very strategic, alhamdulillah. So on our board, we have at least one person from like all different parts of the city. So there's that. And knowing that they're able to, give us and advise us properly on how to reach the girls in their part of the community. And so what we do is like, for the modesty pantry, for instance, we held a halaqa at one of the local masjids, and the halaqa's topic was about stewardship, and how stewardship is a form of worship in Islam. And it was a beautiful topic, and I want to say like maybe 50 girls or something, 30 to 50 girls came to it. And we told them about the modesty pantry, and we're like, hey, this is a beautiful opportunity for you guys. Like, now that you hear about this topic of stewardship and taking care of what Allah has given you, come participate in the modesty pantry. And that was a very that was one of the ways that we put out information and about our event, alhamdulillah. And we try to do different things like that. We have a Instagram page where we try to really get our community involved. And so, for example, one of the girls, she's not on our board, but she participated in the retreat last year. So one of our PR members reached out to her and had her collab with us to do a post so she could share her experience, and that was really lovely. yeah, and we try to just be very engaging with the things that we post on our page. In addition to anytime there's any event happening in the city, even if it's not hosted by us, you will for sure see at least 5 of our board members, alhamdulillah. And I think it just says a lot about the fact that the board members really believe in the mission, alhamdulillah. And so we'll go to some of the different events in the city and just, casually talk with some of the sisters, recruit them, tell them about MGDT, let them know, hey, if you're looking for a sisterhood, come to our events. We definitely have your back, inshallah. So seeing anything as an opportunity, essentially, to recruit more girls and to have them join us, I think has been really helpful.
Wow, that's really good. That's amazing. It's nice to see that sisterhood, that unity between you as well, because taking, to part in these things and organizing them takes a lot of work, subhanAllah. And if you're not like kind of on the same page, it's going to be difficult to keep up with things like that. Alhamdulillah, may Allah put barakah for you guys. So another question I wanted to ask regarding the work that you're doing was, what kind of challenges do you feel that a lot of the young listeners are facing these days?
SubhanAllah. I would say for sure a lot of them are very, very internal, very spiritual, I would say, because just from the things that I've noticed, I think the first and foremost is, the how do I phrase this? I have the words for it because these are things I think about pretty often, alhamdulillah. Okay, so when it comes to living in the West and the values that are imposed on us, and a lot of times they're not in line with Islam, especially when we think about like consumerism and capitalism and how they essentially, for lack of better words, prey on the weaknesses of women in order to essentially take from us. I think a lot of the and I mentioned individualism a little bit earlier because that's also true as well, where it can manifest in so many different ways. Sometimes we might feel like there's this ultra importance put on the way that we look and are perceived in society as women, and it's interesting because even in the eyes of Allah and the way that Allah looks at us, like our beauty is not what is important to Allah. What's important to Allah is the internal desire to be near to Him manifests externally. And so I think some of the issues that I see for sure manifest in the girls is I mentioned spirituality in the sense of hopelessness and not realizing how kind and loving and merciful that Allah is, because our minds are so filled with this idea that Allah is only a punishing God and a one that we should just be fearful of. But the thing about being a Muslim is that we're also taught that Islam is the deen of the middle path, right? Everything that we do and we're taught in Islam is about striving for that balance. So knowing that Allah is one who is so kind and merciful and generous, but also acknowledging the fact that we do have to have a degree of respect and fear for Him, not in the same sense that we would fear the scary shadow figure you see from the corner of your eye in the middle of the night. No, it's a different kind of fear that implies respect. And so I think that's definitely one thing, because for a lot of the girls in our community, we were raised by fearful parents. A lot of our parents escaped from war and they came here, had carry a lot of trauma with them. And so I would say that's definitely one thing. And so I think when we experience that, it's very, very natural to be very distrusting of people, and to, take a couple steps back and not want to be involved in the community, and to be more prone to individualism and isolating yourself and so on. And so that's a really big thing, I think, because when we lack trust for one another, and that's really rampant in our societies, why would we trust Allah if we can't trust each other? You get what I'm saying? And so that's something I know for us as MGDT, we really strive to embody and to encourage one another to do, because at the end of the day, Allah put us here with each other. And so things are, I think, it's easier to do acts of worship with other people when you know that you trust one another, when you know that you can rely on one another, when you know that the thing that brings you both closer together is Allah. Another thing that I would say is holding ourselves to Western values. And the reason why I keep saying Western values is because they're really not Islamic values at the end of the day. You know, putting ultra like extra importance on, you know, the success that we achieve, so that maybe other things like pursuing your relationship with Allah is put on the back burner. I know that that's the point in life where I'm at now, and I see like from myself, I'm 28 years old, and so alhamdulillah, like I'm at the point where even in the conversations that I have with my friends, I'm noticing like, you know, as we get closer to our 30s, we're having the conversations that we really need to have. Like, you know, how am I going to draw near to Allah? Like, in spite of all this, like I'm missing something. Like, these are the conversations that I have with the people around me, like where they feel like they're missing something, and that missing something is Allah at the end of the day, right? Because when you have this void in your heart that can't be filled, and you try to fill it with things that are finite, inevitably it's always going to feel empty. And the only thing that we can fill it with is Allah, because Allah is infinite. We can't compare Allah to anyone or anything or any concepts, really. So that's another thing. When I talked about individualism, I would say they're all related at the end of the day. But when I talked about individualism, the way that manifests into issues that we see like in our community is, you know, this desire to just worry about oneself without realizing that when you worry about the collective, without detriment to yourself, right? Like make sure you fulfill the needs of yourself and the needs of those around you who Allah told you to prioritize. But when you worry about the needs of the collective, it's always going to be a form of worship, especially when it comes from the right place. And I think that's another thing that I wanted to bring up, because you know, in this like individualism can manifest even in ways like, for example, like gossiping, and people probably don't consider it of a way that individualism can manifest, but like satisfying the needs of me, even if it's to the detriment of yourself, I think is a way that individualism can manifest, because no longer is it about, oh, okay, like if I sit here and I talk bad, like this person came to me and they spoke bad about someone else. If I sit here and I engage in that, like, how is it going to affect the collective, right? It might affect the way that I view the person that they're talking about, so that in the future, if I have to work with that person, I'm not going to be able to do that, because all I'm going to think about is how this person told me XYZ about them. Or maybe you end up telling in the midst of, you get what I'm saying? Like in the midst of gossiping, you end up telling that other person like something even worse about the other person, and that makes it even bigger issue.
As well. Yeah, exactly. And it reminds me of the hadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like that somebody came and was telling him about another person that he hadn't met, and then he kind of stopped them from mentioning these negative things about the person because he hadn't met them, you know. So you know, when you do that, and obviously gossiping is haram, and even listening to it as well, like, so we know that. But you know, just like you said, those kind of perceptions build up in your mind about certain people, and sometimes you really actually find out about what somebody has said about another person isn't even true. You know, that's what's sad as well. And it comes back to the point that he was talking about earlier on, which relating to the community and having trust for each other as well. Because if this kind of behavior is kind of, you know, accepted generally, and, you know, people keep doing it, then that's why people wouldn't have this kind of trust between each other as well, you know. SubhanAllah. So it's like having this negative behavior, and then not only that, but it gives you know, in the community, it gives a bad outlook on Muslims, because Muslims don't see other Muslims as being good people in general. And then, especially living in Western countries, we value, like you said, the Western morals, or so-called morals, or their kind of standards, as better than what we have in our own culture. Because obviously we're looking at Islam, and whatever cultural background we're coming from, but we're going to look at that as being, you know, less. You know, it's like it's missing something, you know. But the reality is, it's because we haven't been implementing it properly. This is the problem.
Oh, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Because a lot of times we end up experiencing, you know, problems in our lives and not realizing that we're living by someone else's standards, and not like Allah standards. Because inevitably, like if we're always living by something someone else told us to do, whether it's an an act, like a willful act of submission or not. I was just, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, the idea of like, the competitive behavior over the maintaining like communal ties and so on. That's something that is very much pushed from the Western perspective. And I think like, even when we think about like, the male gaze and how that manifests and how women treat one another and judge each other according to like what men find attractive, as opposed to, what Allah might find important, is something else that I think about from time to time, because like you find women sometimes comparing one another and treating one another differently, uh, because they're not fulfilling this idea that folks in the West, the European standard, whatever you want to call it, live up to. And what do they call it? Pretty privilege or whatever? Like when you do match that and then people treat you a certain way because of it. I don't know. And so oftentimes I find the sisters that I talk to feeling like they do need to live up to this idea of what it looks like to be pretty. And it really just takes away from
I think
the quality of our life.
That affects people's ability to be able to wear the hijab. I think because they've got this it's like another type of inferiority complex, isn't it? Because I think, to be honest, this is something I actually want to make an episode about, just this, because I think the whole standard of beauty and what is perceived to be beauty in whatever culture, and I think the Western culture is kind of dominating in that sense as well. So even in some of our, what I call back home countries, people are starting to adopt those kind of views of Western, what is perceived as beauty in the West. Because obviously they're so heavily promoted, but it's affecting sisters to such an extent. I've met sisters before who their husbands, they want them to pluck their eyebrows, so they pluck their eyebrows because they think that, they have to obey their husband, or their husband wants them to always wear a certain amount of makeup, and they're wearing so much makeup that when it's time to make wudu, they don't even want to make wudu, because it's like you'll end up ruining the makeup and then having to redo it or whatever. It's not practical,
Yeah.
So they put themselves in these kind of situations because of these this kind of inferiority complex, and it's sad really, because I know people say that makeup gives them confidence, but in reality, like, if you need makeup to be more confident, then why? Like, I think people need to think about the why. Why is it giving you more confidence? And I'm not talking about people who might have some kind of physical and actual, maybe like deformity or something like that, because obviously there's this extremes and there's different situations for people. But in general, a lot of sisters, like, they have this attachment that they feel like they can't do without it, or it might not be makeup, it could be something else, for example, and it's like holding them back from fulfilling the rights of hijab properly, I think. So I think that's like quite important.
Yeah, I definitely do. I agree, because when you were talking, I was thinking about like intentions in general, and why I say that niqab really put a mirror in front of me regarding my intentions. Because now if I'm like leaving the house and I'm doing something where I'm feeling a little bit off about it, like, okay, maybe I should not wear this thing, because for me, living in the West as a niqabi, sometimes I feel like I have to wear colors to not be seen as one of those Muslims, for lack of better words. You know what I mean? It always happens.
Absolutely.
And I think that's another thing I think like is a really good like mental practice to do before you leave the house, is asking yourself, okay, like, why am I doing this? Why am I wearing, or not even just before you leave the house in general, like, why am I doing this? Why am I wearing this? I even had a conversation with some of my friends a couple months ago, and one of them was telling me, that it's gotten to the point where she felt like she couldn't leave the house unless she wore makeup, or she couldn't even go to an event actually that she was invited to unless she wore makeup. Like, it was associated with, it was like a habit for her. It's kind of like, when you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, like it's a habit like that we build over time. For her, leaving the house without wearing makeup to an event seemed impossible to her. So then if she couldn't get her makeup done, it was like, what is the point of going to an event? And I just want to challenge our girls to ask themselves these questions, like, why am I doing this? Is it because someone else influenced me to do it? Is it because this is the best thing for me? Because I think a lot of times we might think something is our intentions, and then in reality, Allah shows you that that wasn't really your intention.
Absolutely. So, with the work that you've been doing so far, do you feel that, or have you come across young sisters, for example, who really would like to wear the niqab, but they're having these issues or these kind of internal conflicts, which is like stopping them or preventing them from actually taking that step? Maybe even family members are against it or something like that. Have you had any experience with sisters like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I remember, for example, one girl, she was telling me that even though she was raised in a Muslim family, she's the only like hijabi in her family. Alhamdulillah, she's a hijabi, but she's the only hijabi in her family, and she was telling me that she's interested in wearing niqab, but she doesn't see it as a reality as long as she's living with them, because of the backlash that she would receive, and how it would almost seem backward to her parents, because it isn't aligned with the Western values that they believe are should be promoted. And I hear all the time, especially even online too, where a lot of girls are telling me, they might be reverts and they're interested in it, or um, they might live in an area, they're Muslim, born Muslims, lifelong Muslims, and they live in an area where it just would not be safe for them to live, to practice niqab. And so, subhanAllah, Allah really tests everybody very, very differently, because on the one hand, we have the girls who really just want to experience what niqab is like, and it might even be like a life-threatening issue for them to put it on where they're at. And then on the other hand, we have the girls like me, alhamdulillah, who have the full support of the people in their lives. So it's always really interesting, but at the same time, um, I don't know. I know some folks might say it's heartbreaking, but I promise, I've been thinking a lot about like this idea of what is bad, from a worldly perspective, but like from an Islamic perspective, because you might think something is bad for someone, but for someone who is struggling for years and wants to practice niqab and isn't able to, for whatever reason, maybe it's family or maybe it's the city they live in, they experience a lot of backlash. When they finally get in the position where they can, the sweetness that they're going to experience, the humility, the pureness in their intentions is unmatched. So Allah tests everybody very, very differently, but I definitely have seen a lot of girls who even with hijab, for sure with niqab, but even with hijab, I've seen girls say that they don't know what they're going to do, because they're the only people in their lives who want to do something like this, even though they're surrounded by Muslims. And I think for me, that's always the most interesting perspective to hear, when someone is surrounded by Muslims and they're not supported by it. Because I grew up in a Somali community where it was not rare to see someone wearing, niqab or full-on jilbab, hijab from the head to the floor, sometimes even gloves, So, alhamdulillah. I hope that answers your question. I don't know what it's like in the
Yes,
UK,
it
but
does. Savannah, and you touched on being from a Somali background as well. So I was going to ask you, do you have, that being the case, have you met any sisters who've been forced into wearing the niqab? Because sometimes that's the general perception that is, believed by, Western kind of narratives that, any woman who's covering from head to toe must be forced into doing it.
absolutely not. Yeah, anyone that I've known and met so far that has worn niqab has never been um, forced into it. In fact, it wasn't even something that their family encouraged. It was more so a decision that they came to, and then they started practicing it, or then they started working towards practicing it. It's always been a choice, um, which I find very lovely, because I think, when we do things from a place of choice, then we can arrive at a point with our intentions and with our sincerity that would be a lot more difficult. I don't want to say you can't, but like it would just be a lot more difficult if it weren't a choice. Because I mean, I don't know, I think something that people like get really shocked about when they hear that it is a choice. And I never want any girl to feel like she has to prove, oh, okay, like, yeah, it was a choice for me. Like you don't have to prove that to anyone if you don't want to. Um, and it's something that I try to stray away from as well. But I definitely have seen like everyone that I know practice it from a place of wanting to, and it being a choice for them. Alhamdulillah. Because when you think about niqabis, like we're even a minority in the Muslim community. we're a minority within a minority. Or actually, let me not say we're a minority within a minority, because 1 in every 4 people is a Muslim, but you get the point.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And that's the thing that's funny as well, because there are a lot of Muslims, but still there's so many misconceptions about Muslims out there. And people have the wrong idea about Muslims in general for so many reasons, even though we're not such a minority as that we're kind of we even maybe fool ourselves into believing that something, which is a shame.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's really interesting as well. Alhamdulillah. So what kind of advice do you usually give to those young sisters who are struggling with the idea of coming to actually adopt the niqab and start wearing it, for these reasons that you've mentioned?
Yeah. So honestly, first and foremost, I'm always going to tell them to make dua to Allah and to truly believe in the power of dua, because I think sometimes we forget it. Like, Allah brought the whole entire universe into existence. There's nothing Allah really can't do. Any risk that we have that's written for us is going to come from Him. And so if you want to begin practicing niqab, for sure, number one, make dua to Allah and ask Allah to purify your intentions and to make it something that you have the strength to do. Because I think, it can be a big hurdle for girls, especially if you're not living in a society where others are wearing it. It really can test you sometimes. Like for me, I mentioned to you, like, my tests were not external, they were more so internal. And so I find myself like constantly tested internally, and alhamdulillah, it being a means for me to potentially like better myself. So for sure, make dua, number one, first and foremost. And then number two, I would say just do it. When you decrease the gap between the time it takes to make a decision and actually doing it, you end up taking more steps and actually making a move. Because oftentimes we get caught up in the space of, thinking about doing something and not actually doing it. And so if you haven't done it and you're just thinking about it, you haven't done it. So just do it.
Exactly. And then you end up overthinking as well, isn't it? That's often what happens. And it's like you open the door for shaitan to start throwing so many doubts into having that, getting that reward for, having a good intention and actually implementing it. Because that's one of the things, if the shaitan can't make you sin, he'll stop you from doing the deeds, which, you will be able to get more reward from it, subhanAllah.
Exactly.
Alhamdulillah. So I have to ask this question, since you deal with a lot of young sisters as well. How was that? Like, obviously varying age and stuff like that, but just touching on what we mentioned earlier about identity and kind of Western perceptions of beauty and things like that. Would you say that the niqab is a barrier, especially in respect to those younger sisters who might not be yet married? Because often one of the problems or one of the kind of impediments for sisters who want to wear the niqab, if it's not from them themselves, maybe their parents or their peers might tell them, well, if you start wearing the niqab now, how are you going to get a husband? And another misconception with with the niqabi sisters is often from people that they when they see you with niqab, that they automatically assume that you're married as well.
Yeah.
So would you describe the niqab as being a barrier in any way?
I think it's a barrier against the guys you don't want to be with. Because if someone is not going to be with you because you're wearing niqab, I think they're weeding themselves out. But other than that, I don't personally believe it to be a barrier. But I know I do speak from a place of privilege because I've been married for 9 years now, almost 9 years in August, inshallah. I feel like there's so many different ways for you to put yourself out there, for you to meet people, especially for potential spouses, that unless you're just cramped up at home and you're not putting yourself out there, I don't see how that could happen. Especially in the day and age that we live, we have so many different opportunities to be in the community and to see who's out there, and to, like, we have social media, we have these conferences.
Exactly.
Like, there's so many ways for you to get out there and meet people, and to put yourself out there as well. That, I don't know. I don't think it's a barrier at all. I really don't. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So since we're the niqab, you said you started it last year. Have you done any traveling at all with it?
I did. I went to I didn't get on a plane yet. I'm supposed to be taking my first flight as a Niqabi in August, but I have like, done road trips and went to a different city. Alhamdulillah. I'll let you know how it goes after I take my first plane trip, because to be honest, I'm a little bit
Inshallah.
nervous.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
That'll be a nice little video actually for your channel, I think, because mashallah, I really love your content that you're doing, Alan Mubarak. And when I was happy that YouTube YouTube made me see it, because mashallah, sometimes it's really hard to find content from your Harvey sisters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And these days I've noticed you've been coming up on on my feeds on YouTube, alhamdulillah. So it was nice to come across your channel and see what you're doing. And I really like the way that you approach the issues of niqab, and well, not niqab specifically, but hijab in general. Especially for those younger sisters who might be, facing, these variety of challenges, especially living in the Western capital. I wanted to ask you, so, I touched on this earlier, but do you feel that sisters who wear the niqab get treated differently from sisters who wear the hijab?
Yeah, I definitely do. In Muslim circles, and then also in, non-Muslim circles. Because I think, like in Muslim circles, a lot of times, niqabis get treated as women who are almost snobby, or think that they're better than others, or are maybe on the other side, like just very pious and don't like they almost want to be secluded from society, I would say. And then opposite of that, and alhamdulillah, I say this while also acknowledging the fact that I haven't experienced it much, because I think I'm in a very unique position as a content creator. So people get bits and pieces of me online, and so they know, hopefully, inshallah, they know I'm not like that. But on the opposite side, when it relates to non-Muslims and stuff, I've just noticed, like, even in the way that non-Muslim men treat me. Like, I remember I went and I was speaking to some woman at a grocery store about a product that I never tried, and she was just talking, she was raving about it. And her husband was standing next to her, and I asked her, I was like, hey, like, do you like that product? Like, what do you think about it? And her husband didn't even acknowledge me, didn't look at me, he looked straight on the floor. Like, and it was an interesting experience. I was like, hold up, you know what? I think I like this. I like not being looked at by non-Muslim men. So that was an interesting experience. But I would say people are always curious, and they're always looking. So if I thought they were looking at me before when I didn't practice niqab, they're definitely looking now. And I don't mind it. When you live in a society where people are not practicing niqab or even hijab as often, people are going to have questions, people are going to look, people are going to be curious. So I don't mind it. But yeah, alhamdulillah. And then there's also, the cases of women getting mistreated because of it. I haven't yet to meet a niqabi, and at least in my city, that has been treated negatively because of niqab. Actually, you know what? Never mind. Let me take that back. I just remembered one of my friends was mistreated as a social worker, like in a hospital, because of it. But yeah,
so she works at a social worker.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she physically works there. She's a social worker at the hospital.
Right. SubhanAllah.
But yeah.
So what about you? Have you ever experienced any abuse for wearing the niqab at all?
Have I experienced online? People always have something to say online because they have the anonymity. Yeah, they can be anonymous. Exactly. But sometimes even when they're not anonymous, they'll still message me. And I keep screenshots just in case, because you never know what's gonna happen. So if someone sends me a particularly discomforting message, I'll keep screenshots. But yeah, I don't know. SubhanAllah, some people, they don't see niqabis as humans, but to be honest, I think some people just don't see women as humans, and that's a whole other conversation too. Like, I think
yes, definitely,
some men just literally don't see us beyond their attraction for us. And I think sometimes that makes them mad, especially at niqabis, because how dare you cover up?
Exactly. And it's funny because recently, one of my close friends, he had an issue with a man contacting her on social media as well, and basically asking her perspective about homosexuality. And it's just like, well, you can see she's a Muslim woman. What do you think her perspective is going to be? And she was responding to him, well, why are you asking me? Why didn't you ask a Muslim man about it? Like, why are you approaching me as a Muslim woman? If you like, do you know what I mean? Like, and it's just like, they do that because these people, they really don't have guts at the end of the day. That's why all this kind of propaganda against the hijab and the niqab and stuff like that. It's because they don't have guts to like approach like Muslim men and like, make these kind of, I don't know, slurs and things like that. They always want to approach women, they say that they'll say that we're terrorists and stuff like that for covering up. But if you really believed that, would you be coming and abusing us, in the streets? You wouldn't, because you'd be afraid, but you're not afraid. So, it's a bit of a, what do they call it, oxymoron or something? I don't know if that's the right word, but it's like, it's just hypocritical, isn't it? You say you're afraid, but then the way you treat us shows that you clearly aren't afraid, because you're trying to degrade us and put us down and things like that, and make us feel like we're less than you because we're of the way that we're dressed.
That's so interesting that you say that, because it's also like they call us oppressed, but they're also oppressing us too. They don't realize it, but they're also oppressing us.
Exactly.
Like,
they are the oppressors. Like, that's the thing. They say these things, and then they come and do the very thing that they accuse us of being subjugated to. But you are the one that's doing it. And reality is, if we look at history, I love history actually. I'm trying to like study history more and more, but Islamic history and things like, when we look at history, we see like across the Muslim countries, at every turn, like when the colonizers have been in our lands, like they've always gone for the hijab. They've always gone for the hijab and trying to remove it from the Muslim woman, as a way of being able to control and suppress her, and like show this kind of ownership over the Muslim women.
Yeah.
And it's ironic that now, even after like it's not even such a long time, maybe 100 years, so which isn't that long ago, but it just shows how important history is. And when we don't actually study our history and look into it, we forget where we've come from on our past, and learning those lessons from there. Because now you get sisters, for example, who come from, these same countries that have been, abused from, past colonizers, and they think that their freedom of expression is in them abandoning the niqab or abandoning the hijab altogether. They think that they see those as signs of oppressions now, and see the taking off their clothes as a sign of freedom, when in reality is when the colonizers came to their countries, they forced them to undress. Because they wanted them to be their slaves, subhanAllah. And now women willingly take their clothes off for men now, and they'll say, oh, well, it's my choice, I dress how I want. But you're dressing how they want you to dress, because you're not dressing. That's what they want you to like wear less clothes. That's what makes them happy. SubhanAllah. It's funny, and it's funny because as well, and it just reminds me of another thing that I can't remember. I saw from a brother's YouTube channel, but he said something like, I can't remember who it was, but he said, if Islam is a man-made religion, then why does Islam commands that you do things which go against your desires as a man, as a human being? Because reality is we're Allah makes the haram for us, the things that are harmful for us, but in reality those are the things that are innate desires, like our lustful desires or our lowly desires. We naturally, as humans, we're attracted to those things, and so Allah makes permissible for us the things that is good for us, and it's not going to be harmful to us, and not just us but the community as a whole as well. And that comes back to what you were saying before about the community, and how obviously you need to take care of yourself, number one, but you still need to also take care of the community. And taking care of the community, or taking care of yourself, is part of taking care of the community too. And I think that's what some people miss, because like there's people lack that balance often, where they either go to one of two extremes, like you mentioned, thinking about the individualism, thinking just me, what I want to do, I can do what I want as long as I'm not hurting anybody else. But then they may be damaging themselves or doing something which is not permissible. And then the opposite, you get people who completely neglect themselves, and then they're striving and doing everything to like please others, and working, bending over backwards to fulfill the needs of others, but then they just neglect themselves, and then it ends up like in a negative situation in the end, because maybe their health will be affected, or even mental health, other things. So it's about striking that balance. That's what Islam is about. It is the middle way, subhanAllah. So yeah, alhamdulillah. So it's really interesting thinking about these different things. Like there's so many topics that you can raise, just even from mashallah, the points that you mentioned earlier, subhanAllah, Mubarak, just like even like thinking now just about so many things that you said. It's just like so many ideas are coming to my mind. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So alhamdulillah, we've gone through a lot of things today, alhamdulillah, but and I know you're busy, and I really want to say jazakallah khair from the bottom of my heart for giving your time and out of your busy schedule, alhamdulillah, because I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, and alhamdulillah, you're such a lovely sister. Allah Mubarak, may Allah bless you and your endeavors and your family. Ameen. And I'm going to wrap up by asking you the final question, which is, what does the niqab mean to you?
Subhanallah. Niqab means to me, it really is a mirror for me. I think I mentioned that briefly earlier, that niqab is a mirror to me. I feel like Allah has put in something in front of me that always makes my intentions known to me, and I think that's something that's very sacred to me. Inshallah, I would love to go to Jannah, and I hope and I pray that we unite there in Jannatul Firdaus, and that Jahannam is haram for us. But alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful Allah put me on this path for it to be a mirror for me, because I feel like there's never a day that passes now that I'm not aware of my intentions in the way that I physically represent myself, whether it's online or in front of other people and so on. And that's a really big thing, especially for someone who struggles and truly does, I'm not perfect at all. If alhamdulillah, I'm not perfect at all. Allah conceals a lot of my sins, alhamdulillah. And so I think it's also just another tool for me to draw nearer to Him, alhamdulillah, as a lot of things can be tools to draw nearer to Allah. Yeah, it's a tool, and it is a mirror, alhamdulillah. I would say that. Let's keep it sweet and short.
Jazakallah khair, sister. Thank you so much for giving your time today, and inshallah, I would love to talk to you again if the opportunity, presents itself, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.